Welcome back to the Rice Report, everybody. Our interview conversation series. We are joined again by Larry C. Johnson, former CIA. Great information out there. Larry's been on fire on podcasts all over the place, talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how we're continuing to escalate, despite the fact that we've been hearing for a long time that this will de-escalate. So, thank you for joining us again, Larry. Appreciate you being here.
I always appreciate the invite, Eric. Thank you.
And I was teasing you off air. This is the riskiest shirt that I have in my closet, so I wanted to match Larry. So next time you're on here, I'm good. I'm going to Florida in a couple weeks, so I'm coming back with a Larry Johnson shirt. Hopefully, it'll be your original design.
Yeah, I need to put out that clothing line.
I'd snap up a
Uh,
couple for sure.
we'll
Those are
call it
great shirts.
uh, the old fat guy being flashy.
I love it. I love it. Well, Larry, let's hop into Ukraine, Russia. We just had 40 nuclear capable bombers blown up by drones that we're told were smuggled into is it rooftops of storage facilities. Uh,
No, they were actually, uh, it was fired out of a semi truck trailer that the roof opened. But let's be clear, although Ukraine claimed that they destroyed 40, 41, they've now got satellite photos have been published. It looks like they took out three 70-year-old aircraft
oh boy.
and damaged two to three others. So, not it was not significant damage at all to the Russian air fleet. What was significant in it is that the reason those planes were out visible on the tarmac and not in some protected revetment is that under the New START treaty, both the United States and Russia are obligated to put their strategic bombers in a place where the other side can photograph them and monitor them from the satellites. So, from Russia's standpoint, this was part of their nuclear triad. The triad means they've got air launched, sea launched, and land launched missiles, and these airplanes carry the air launched variety. And so this was viewed as a potential act of war by the Russians. Now, what we've seen in the last couple of days in terms of statements from Russia, they're treating this strictly as a terrorist attack, and we can talk about the significance of that. But this was uh, this is something that Donald Trump, if you've monitored his comments about Vladimir Putin, say a week and a half ago, so like Monday, May 26th, when he was calling Putin crazy,
Yeah.
he's out. I don't know why he's doing what he's doing. Yesterday, Donald Trump was singing a whole different tune. Yeah, President Putin. Yeah, there's going to be some retaliation for very hard retaliation for this. No kidding, Don. So, um, and we can explain why Trump, I think, basically was frightened about the possible response of Russia and did everything in his power to try to defuse the situation.
Could he be playing psychological games? I mean, that's certainly what.
No,
No.
no. So here's what happened. Um, Starting on Friday night, going into Saturday, there was a bomb or some explosives were placed on a bridge in Bryansk, one of the Russian, let's call them Russian states. And it was timed in such a way that when it was detonated, they could see an oncoming passenger train. So they detonated in such a way that the bridge would collapse on the train, which it did. Killed 7 people, injured like 130. That was followed a few hours later by a blowing up of another bridge in Kursk. So you had these two terrorist, these were legitimately terrorist attacks. Then on Sunday, you had these five reported there were five air bases that Ukraine tried to attack, but it turned out they only were able to launch drones at two of them. The other air bases either defeated the drones or the drones malfunctioned. But in any event, it was viewed with just enormous outrage in Russia. Now, the fact that late Sunday night, Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov called up Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, and Trump's also National Security Advisor. and they had a chat. Now, I think some have mistakenly said, "Oh, well, just Lavrov just wanted to call Rubio up and talk about the next day's meeting that was supposed to take place in Istanbul." And I'm thinking, yeah, I've actually met with Lavrov 1st of March, and Lavrov's not the kind of guy sitting around in his jammies on Sunday night going, "Oh God, you know, do I watch a rerun of Friends or do I call Marco Rubio? I'll call Marco Rubio.
How's
Okay.
Marco doing? I've been
Yeah.
missing
Hey,
Marco.
Marco, buddy. ¿Qué pasa, amigo? So, no, so Lavrov called Rubio. And while Rubio put the spin on it that, oh, yeah, I wanted to express our condolences for the terrorist attacks on those two trains, the fact of the matter is, Lavrov called up Rubio to deliver a very tough message from Vladimir Putin that basically we need to know for sure that the United States, were not involved with this because we are going to punish every state, country that we believe had a hand in this. It
Sure.
was a terrorist act, and we're going to punish Ukraine as well as their supporters. You need to let us know, are you a supporter? And boy, Rubio uh, probably got Trump out of bed that night and said, hey, the Russians are not happy. Now, people say, well, you're just speculating, Johnson. How do you know that? Well, what I know is that Donald Trump is not a shy guy when it comes to using Truth Social.
Sure.
He's actually a pretty prolific guy. In fact, some of his friends and supporters wish he'd like tone it down or not say as much. Well, Monday and Tuesday, he was strangely silent, not saying word one, especially about Russia. Not a word. Nothing about the attacks. On Monday, the meeting between the Russians and Turks and Ukrainians took place in Istanbul, Turkey. Now, the two delegations, there are about 10 people on each side. Before they met, the head of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, and the defense minister for Ukraine, Umarov, met privately. Now, the big meeting was supposed to take off like at 2 o'clock. Well, it didn't get started until like 3:15. It was an hour
Hmm.
and 15 minutes late. Why? Because Medinsky and Umarov met privately, and their meeting went on for 2.5 hours. And what came of that meeting? In that meeting, Medinsky basically he laid out the Russian memorandum about telling Ukraine, you need to surrender now. These 4 territories that we occupy are ours. You get the hell out. You do not join NATO. You're going to reduce your army to this level. And this is our demands. And if you don't take this, let us be clear that this is your last offer because our next offer is going to be more severe.
Hmm.
Well, when they came out of that meeting, Medinsky went to the big group meeting, but Umarov disappeared. He was en route to the United States to tell the Americans, Houston, we have a problem. Uh, and the Russians, they didn't bring up any of the terrorist attacks. They didn't bring up the attack on the strategic forces, but they laid out a very tough proposal. But frankly, it was the same one Vladimir Putin had presented a year ago, June 14th. Then the next day, Tuesday, June 3rd, Pete Hegseth announces, hey, that Ukraine working group that we always have at Ramstein. I didn't attend the last meeting, but I did attend via Zoom. I'm not going tomorrow, and I'm not even going to appear on Zoom. Have a nice time. This is the first time that a U.S. Secretary of Defense has not been a part of this meeting either in person or via Zoom. First time.
Hmm.
Sending a message to the Russians. Yeah, we're backing away from Ukraine. Those Ukrainians, they're acting a little crazy now. And then you got the phone call with Donald Trump and Putin on the 4th. We don't know who initiated the call. My betting is it was Trump.
Sure.
And Trump called up to basically, if you will, apologize, try to placate Putin because Putin addressed, he televised his meeting with his national security team yesterday.
Hmm.
And Putin's body language and tone of voice were what I called controlled fury. He was angry. And I'm sure that came across in his conversations with Donald Trump. And Trump made a point, whereas a week ago he was calling Putin crazy.
Yeah.
No, President Putin now was President Putin. It wasn't Vladimir, it was President Putin. And came out and said, the, President Putin made it clear that they're going to have to respond to this, and it's going to be a very strong response.
Sure.
And then following that, within an hour of that conversation, U.S. State Department issues a travel advisory warning to any U.S. citizens in Ukraine, like is basically get the hell out, be careful, you're going to get bombed. So some are saying, oh no, they're not going to do much on this. I would simply note that since the start of the special military operation, there have been several terrorist attacks against Russia.
Hmm.
The first was, I think, October 2022, when the Kerch Bridge was struck,
Yeah.
and so damaged some cars, killed a couple of people. The second big one was the attack a year ago, March, at the Crocus City
Yeah.
Hall, which was a big theater, shopping center, and killed 145 people. I mean,
Huge
not an
event.
inconsequent, big time.
Hmm.
But at that point, Putin didn't come out and make the kind of speech that he did yesterday. So that tells me that they're attaching a significance to the attacks that took place over the weekend in a way that they've never have before,
Hmm.
and the response is going to be, I think, quite significant in terms of damaging Ukraine's complete electrical grid if Russia could conceivably turn off all the lights,
Hmm.
as well as go after some key Ukrainian government ministries. Uh, there was some concern or speculation that Russia was going to attack Germany or the United Kingdom or France, but I don't think that that's in the cards right
That'd be completely illogical. Yeah.
now. Well, not illogical, because the Brits certainly had a very robust hand in these attacks that took place over the weekend, and so they've made themselves a target. But Russia's not looking to expand that at this time. But they're putting everybody on notice.
How did the UK and Germany, how were they involved in this?
Well, the UK in particular, from its intelligence support, uh, for a while, its British Special Air Services (SAS) was providing bodyguard executive protection for Zelensky. But
Right.
they provide operational planning, they provide intelligence. So the Brits were involved, and candidly, I believe that the CIA was involved.
Yeah.
Now, Trump went out of his way to deny it, but
Which he has
uh,
to do. I mean, every president
yeah,
denies CIA involvement.
it's always, with the CIA, it's plausible deniability.
Yeah.
But let's put it this way: we're left with one of three options. Either the CIA didn't know this was going to happen, which then makes you say, then why the hell do we have a CIA? They're supposed to know this kind of thing is going to happen. They knew it was going to happen, but said nothing to the president and didn't say anything to the Ukrainians, like, no, you better not do that. Or they were directly involved.
Yeah.
There's only really three options in this, and none of them are good.
No.
And that's what, when the Russians now are looking at the United States, is the United States is not a reliable, trustworthy partner in these negotiations. They recognize that we're a little inconsistent, to put it charitably.
Hmm. So all these peace talks that we've heard for the last 4 months, these are completely out the window at this point now.
Well, the Russians are willing to negotiate, but their negotiation position is clear. Number one, the current territories that voted in a referendum to join Russia, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk, those are now permanently part of Russia. They need to be recognized as such by Ukraine and the international community. and Ukraine needs to get the hell out, pull out all troops, and end all military operations and attacks on those territories. That's point number one. Um, Point number two, Ukraine will never and agrees to never join NATO. Three, all foreign military advisors and weapon systems need to be withdrawn from Ukraine within 30 days. And the rights of the Russian speakers have to be protected. Now, that's Putin laid that out in a speech to the Russian Foreign Ministry on June 14th, 2024. That position really hasn't changed. If anything, it got a little tougher this time because previously he hadn't insisted that the UN Security Council ratify that four territories are Russian, but now he's saying
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, didn't he
And
make a similar offer at the beginning of the conflict where it was pretty much that offer minus the four territories? So now that's kind of included.
well, actually, the first offer there was in April of 2022. What it was, the offer was actually drafted by Ukraine. That's what Foreign Minister Lavrov told me on March 8th. Um, and Russia accepted it. And that proposal left Donetsk and Luhansk as part of Ukraine.
Hmm.
Zaporizhia and Kherson weren't even in the discussion at that point. And the proviso was that they would have a special, those two territories have special status, and they'd be able to speak Russian, and they wouldn't be subject to the persecution and punishment that they had been. And Ukraine walked away from that deal. No, not good enough. Okay, so Russia's now upped it. Okay, you didn't want that deal? We're taking these four territories, and you're going to get start dismantling your military.
Yeah.
Now, this again was from Russia a take it or leave it offer, and so far Ukraine's rejected it, which I expected them to. And so Russia's next time they talk, say next we're taking Nikolaev, Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, and Sumy,
Hmm.
and maybe Kharkiv. We're adding more territory to Russia.
That's half the
And we're gonna,
country. Yeah.
yeah, and so what they're going to do eventually is dismantle Ukraine. They will deny Ukraine access to the Black Sea. Ukraine will be dead as a country.
Yeah. Odessa
That's
is
where this is
important for
headed.
that.
That's where this is headed.
Now, Ukraine has so many different things. Of course, the press loves Ukraine because Ukraine drains the pockets of Washington, puts it in all the cronies' hands. But Ukraine by itself has had they're arresting Orthodox pastors and priests,
Yes.
putting them in jail. They've arrested all the opposing political parties. They've denied an election. Hasn't Russia put together something saying like we will talk if they have another election? And I don't think most people know there's no elections happening in Ukraine. Zelensky is essentially a king at this point.
Yeah, Zelensky suspended the elections a year ago, declaring a martial law. They can't have elections during war. And we said, nonsense. Abraham Lincoln had an election during the Civil War, and he actually won. Um, but Zelensky, in addition to usurping power, and when he comes to dealing with the Russians, particularly Putin's a lawyer,
Yeah.
and he goes, Zelensky can sign an agreement, but he has really no legal authority to make such an agreement stick.
Yeah.
So, we're not going to sign an agreement with him. And then yesterday, they made it clear that because of Ukraine's new designation as a terrorist entity, that Russia will not negotiate or talk to a terrorist entity. So they're going to have elections. Again, that was one of Putin's demands from 2024, and has remained in place. The West, many in the West, particularly in Europe, Germany, England, France, are insistent on a 30-day or permanent ceasefire. Russia is not going to agree to that.
Not at this
They will
point.
not agree to any kind of permanent ceasefire. And if they do agree to a 30-day ceasefire, it's going to be on strict terms about end of military support, intelligence sharing, etc., for Ukraine. Well, Ukraine at this point continues to insist they won't accept it, and that's fine because Russia's going to defeat them on the battlefield.
Yeah.
The next time that there's really substantive negotiations will be negotiations of the type that took place outside of Stalingrad in January 28th, was it,
Yeah.
of 1942, that the uh, the Russian army, the Sixth Army surrendered, or the German army surrendered to the Russians.
Hmm.
Von Paulus surrendered. That's what it's going to be for Ukraine. Ukraine is going to surrender.
How long do you think that's going to take? I mean,
Uh,
no one knows, but what's your guess?
Look, it could be Budanov, the head of military intelligence for Ukraine, said that the end of this month, June, that Ukraine couldn't hold on past that. Uh, I would be surprised if Ukraine is able to sustain this war much past August. But I've made predictions in the past that I've been wrong.
Sure. There's
So,
predictions. Yeah. No
but
one knows.
but the reason I make that prediction is one: the United States is not voting more military aid. The United States is shifting military resources, such as air defense systems that used to be made available to Ukraine, away from Ukraine, shipping them to the Middle East and to Asia. Um, Donald Trump is distancing himself from the Ukraine effort.
As he
And,
should.
Europe is not in a position to replace what the United States has been providing. If anything, Europe is in a far, far weaker condition than the United States with respect to supporting Ukraine. So when you consider all those factors, coupled with Ukraine's got suffering significant losses in terms of manpower, despite Western misinformation that Russia's suffered more casualties than Ukraine, it's
It's
absolutely not true.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Just not true. Um, and but when you put all that information together, Ukraine doesn't have a sustainable way to continue in this war.
Well, plus, if you look at Europe economically, they're toast. I mean, there's no rebounding from where they are currently. They're talking
Yeah,
about confiscating assets like a checking or savings account you haven't touched in 4 or 5 years. They're going to confiscate that for the war efforts in Ukraine. Ironically, in Europe, there hasn't been much of an outcry beyond this. I know if that happened here, we would be all over the place complaining about this or screaming out
yeah.
to politicians. But Europe seems to support this silently, apathetically. And I think if we watch this, I guess kind of the question I have with Ukraine, Russia is like, who's really pulling the strings in Ukraine? It's clearly not Zelensky. I mean, he's not a lead. He was an actor and a comedian before this, so it's
Yeah,
clearly not him. Who's pulling the strings?
uh, this this alliance between some of the oligarchs and this right sector
That makes
Azov
sense.
battalion group, these neo Nazis. I mean, they genuinely are Nazis. I mean, they've read Mein Kampf. They embraced the vision of Hitler, this racial purity idea, and they certainly walk around all tatted out with all the swastikas and eagles that were adorned some of the Nazi paraphernalia. And so Zelensky is just a tool of that outfit. Uh, they've made a lot of money off of this, and
Sure.
you raised sort of the corruption angle of this. While I'm limited about what I can say, I do know that there is an open case now with Department of Justice that involves at least 23 members of Congress, both Senate and House, both Republican and Democrat, who have been getting kickbacks,
Sure.
money out of aid sent to Ukraine. That money was used to purchase certain weapon systems, but those weapon systems were purchased from favored U.S. suppliers at enormous markup prices, and then these members of Congress were getting a cut of that being redirected to their
10% for
funds.
the big guy.
One of the senators, who's from the Republican senators from the South, I'm told, has received $17.3 million.
Wow.
One Democrat senator from the Northeast has received $23 million. So we're talking millions of dollars, not hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, millions.
Wow.
And you wouldn't be, I don't think you'd be surprised to learn that some of the strongest advocates for pumping more money into Ukraine are some of those very individuals who are profiting from this.
Yeah, I think we can figure out who the Republican senator for the South is pretty easily, very easily. Very vocal, very much support Ukraine. We've all known this from the beginning. It's great that that's actually coming out because I think the number is going to be in the hundreds of millions for our politicians getting kickbacks.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just it's a level of corruption that is astronomical. But more importantly, it gets back to what's in the interest of the United States. We claim we're supporting a democracy in Ukraine, but it is not democratic. They've
No.
shut down all opposition political parties, all opposition media. They've shuttered them, and they're attacking the Christian faith,
Hmm.
uh, creating. They've created sort of an alternative church, but this alternative church basically uh, endorses, let's call it, uh, unchristian practices and
Yes.
beliefs. Some have labeled them as satanic. Um, this is the allegations of human trafficking, particularly among children for organs,
Hmm.
where in case of wounded military personnel, oftentimes they're left to die and their organs are harvested sort of against their will and sold on the black market. So, um, there's an enormous level of corruption here. And, Ukraine is bleeding manpower,
Hmm.
and the West is complicit in allowing that to happen. It's in my view, it's an international crime.
I completely agree. And the corruption goes beyond that. So even their minister of commerce came out a year ago and said, hey, despite there being a war, there's almost an 11% increase in new millionaires in Ukraine. So,
Yeah,
and that's something that eluded the press. I caught it immediately, but when you have an 11 in the middle of a war, which we continue to hear is the most brutal war, it's impoverishing the nation. At almost an 11% increase in millionaires in Ukraine. Zelensky has been spotted buying properties, expensive cars. He's bought his mother a villa. This money is not being used for war effort. And you bring up the oligarchs there; it makes complete sense. If you
yeah,
look at the structure of this stuff, I talked about this a year and a half ago. One of the first two funding rounds to Ukraine primarily went to power stations, power companies that were blown up by Russia. So what they did was they issued these bonds at like 14, 15%. Wall Street bought them all. I mean, it was US Wall Street was buying all of these bonds. And then when a new wave of funding would come in, it would pay off the bonds plus 30%. So the guys on Wall Street were making 50, 60, 70% returns in a matter of a few months on
right.
bonds, right? Like a bond should never produce that type of return. This has been an international money laundering campaign, and the only contributors to it have been the United States, and the only benefactors to it have been corrupt nations in Europe, primarily Russia, but many other countries are sharing in this pie because they're
Yeah,
creating financial instruments that ultimately become distressed during war, and then they're paid off with US funding. The other way that this
yeah,
has been a financial war is the fact that people are not equating the GDP calculation with this. When you have military equipment you're sending to a foreign nation, you have to replace that military equipment with new upgrades through US companies paid for by the United States government, which is what held up the GDP through the Biden era was exactly that. When you give
yeah.
away $100 billion in equipment, you have to spend 200 billion to upgrade it, and that 200 billion was counting towards the GDP, making it a positive number. I mean, many American citizens did not calculate this. This has been a money laundering campaign from day one.
Yeah. Well, let's call it a financial crime. I've got,
Oh, yeah,
I've
it's
done
more than money
money
laundering,
laundering.
certainly.
The reason I call it, I'm shy, avoid calling it money laundering is initially for it to be, the money is legally obtained, but it's
Correct.
obtained through corrupt practices. Money laundering starts with a predicate crime, the crime
Correct.
of income generated through criminal activity, human trafficking, arms sales, prostitution, drug sales, and then once you've got this money from dirty sources, you try to hide it. Here we got we need to come up with a new term for this because it is,
Money
uh,
dirtying,
well,
dirty
yeah,
laundry.
yeah. I mean, it's the appropriations. The money's appropriated. It's appropriated for what is appears to be a legitimate purpose, but then the legitimate purpose is a fraud,
Yes.
and it's a fraud by virtue of you not getting what you're paying for. You're getting charged extra, and then that money is being circulated and used to. So it is a financial crime. Um,
Fraud is a better term than money laundering. I completely agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Especially when you
So
look at the
it's
budgets from the for the military industrial complex. I mean, during Ukraine, they were paying over $100 for a Bic pen. So that procurer of the Bic pen, that call it the Bic Corporation, they are not getting $100. They're still getting their standard pay for it. It's the middleman who's brokering that deal, who's taking in a ton of money, which is kicking back to politicians and oligarchs throughout the world. I think most people who are aware of any of this stuff understand that. But the average person out there just listens to the news and says, we got to support Ukraine, despite the fact everyone's getting rich, including Ukrainians, while
yeah.
Americans are getting poorer.
Well, and look at the difference in bang for the buck that the Russians get
Yeah.
compared to to us in the United States. Um, the Russian defense budget, I think, for this year is like $140 billion. But what do they get for that 140 billion? Well, they have a standing army now of 1.5 million soldiers. We in the United States, we have a standing army of 460,000 soldiers. Huh. So Russia's got 3 times the number of soldiers. Russia has fielded 3 different types of hypersonic missiles. We haven't fielded one.
Hmm.
Russia is producing 250 brand new tanks a year. We in the United States produce 70 tanks, but what they're already constructed M1 Abrams. They're just being refit, reconditioned, new software, new paint.
Hmm.
So Russia is outstripping us in terms of building combat aircraft, tanks, artillery, artillery shells, troops, and yet we're spending 8 to 10 times the amount that Russia is.
Yeah, we're over a trillion now, right? Our defense
Now we're at a
budget.
trillion. Now we're at a trillion. Yeah, which is obscene.
I think it's
And
important to note that for $1 trillion, if you converted dollars to seconds, $1 million would take you back to March 24th. If you went to 1 billion seconds, it takes you back to like 1973. A trillion seconds takes you back to 30,000 BC. So when we use the term trillion for a budget for the national defense, I don't know that many people understand just how large that is. That is a
yeah,
enormous
yeah,
amount of money.
yeah, and that's a great analogy you use to make it metaphor to help people understand what we're talking about
Hmm.
and just how massive this is. And the real irony here is the United States, despite spending so much on its military, is we're weaker than I think at any time in our history since the end of World War II.
Hmm.
Um, just look at the fact we put this advanced carrier strike group into the Red Sea, accompanied by 2 destroyers and a cruiser. And what happened? We failed to defeat and neutralize what we claimed was the threat from the Houthis.
Yeah.
We Donald Trump has said he declared victory. Yeah, the Houthis capitulated. We're leaving. Well, the Houthis did no such thing. They just agreed to stop bombing U.S. ships because the U.S. ships are going to leave. They said that's fine
Right.
because their goal was to hit Israel, go after Israel with their missiles, is to try to get Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza and the attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank.
Which is,
So,
by the way, a clear genocide that everyone except for Israel and America acknowledge throughout the world. This is a
well,
clear crisis.
you've even you got a genocide on your hands when Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, 2 of the former prime ministers and both military men, have gone in public
Yeah.
recently in the last 2 weeks and said, "Hey, this is genocide. This is a war crime. What's being done?"
Yeah.
And And even Piers Morgan, you know, he always,
Shocking to hear that, but
yeah,
yes.
because in the past, it's, oh, the attack on October 7th was the most horrific attack. And oh, please, you know, let's
Horrific that week in the Middle East. There's a lot of horrific
let's
attacks there.
let's look at actual numbers and targets attacked, despite the claims by the Zionists that Hamas was beheading babies and raping women. Absolutely not true. There's no evidence of that. People say,
Correct.
"Oh yeah, yeah." Give me the names of the babies that were beheaded. I'll take five. Give me five
Yeah. Zero.
photographs too of the funerals. Well, can't produce it because it didn't happen. What Hamas mounted was really a pretty impressive military raid. They attacked they attacked primarily military outposts and killed a significant number of the Brigade, as an example, which is one of the most specialized, highly trained Israeli military outfits. Then their other objective was to take hostages in order to use them as bargaining chips with Israel.
Mm.
And it was in the course of taking hostages at that music festival. And again, I'm not saying that, that, yeah, clearly that's an act of terrorism.
Yeah, it's
My
horrible. No,
the
nobody will deny that.
definition is any use of violence against civilians is a terrorist act. Well, that was an act of terrorism, but the Israeli military responded to that capture of people and started blowing up cars indiscriminately that were fleeing the site.
Yeah.
And it's estimated as many as 400 or 500 of the Israelis that died that day were actually killed by their own security forces trying to stop Hamas. But
That's
when
the Hannibal option is what they call that, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
Hannibal option or doctrine. But when you hear these Zionists claim, "Oh, this is the worst thing since the Holocaust," and go, "Okay, wait a second. If we're to believe the Holocaust, which cost the lives of 6 million Jews,
That's down to 4.
you're saying that the death of 1,255 Israelis is like the second worst thing in history?
Yeah, not even
You've had
close.
a pretty good run."
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it dishonors and disgraces the legacy of the Holocaust. And in fact, you've had several, Holocaust survivors who are still alive from that era who have come out and condemned what Israel is doing because they see Israel acting in the same way that,
They're
uh,
performing a Holocaust. I mean,
yeah,
that's what they're
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
And the
it
most
is,
amazing thing about that event is, most people will look at it and they'll hear the stories and hear the press, but how did these guys on dirt bikes and hang gliders get through the most impenetrable wall in the Middle East, maybe
yeah,
in the world? I mean, that
yeah,
nation is
no,
completely surrounded by high concrete walls, steel reinforced concrete walls with soldiers and technology all over the place. And for me, right when it happened, I'm like, how did they get in?
yeah.
I mean, how did they get in? They have to have been let in.
Yeah, so I think there's some credibility to the claim that Netanyahu knew this was going to happen, allowed it to
Sure.
happen in order so that they could justify creating the genocide campaign to exterminate the Palestinians
Sure.
from Gaza. And what most Americans don't understand is that among these Palestinians are Christians.
Many.
Yeah, they're not all Muslims. They always like to portray it as a bunch of hardcore Muslims engaged in
Same with
violence.
Lebanon. They attacked Lebanon weeks later. Lebanon is 40% Christian.
Yeah,
Syria is 18% Christian. They're destroying, is it Malulu, the last remaining city in the world that speaks the language of Jesus, Aramaic.
right.
I talk about this all the time. I think most of these wars in the Middle East are to drive the Christians out of the Middle East and
Yeah,
clear a path. But then, of course, there's always the greater Israel plan, where Netanyahu has not been shy. He did a national broadcast, kind of laying out the pitch for the greater Israel plan to take over all these surrounding nations and expand the Jewish stronghold in the Middle East. These are all part of a larger plan. But right now we have daily like a peace request in Gaza, Israel war right now, and then a denial, and then more attacks in the Strip. What is going on out there? That's something I haven't had time to pay attention to lately, but it's not looking good there.
Well, Israel's got limited military capability.
Sure.
You know,
Well,
they've
Gaza
never.
has none, so Palestine has no formal military. So
Well, yeah, this is all the bragging that's done about Israel's great military power prowess in the Middle East. Um, what we've seen is now 21, 22 months since October 7th, Israel has been unable to defeat Hamas.
yeah,
And Israel enjoys every tactical, strategic advantage you could possibly have in terms of weapons, manpower, air power, armored, artillery, intelligence. And here's Hamas with basically sidearms, rifles, small arms, occasional mortar or two, some RPGs, rocket propelled grenades. But
primarily made from PVC piping. I mean,
yeah,
that's they're
in
very
some
homemade
cases.
weapons. Yeah,
So, and yet, with all those disadvantages, Hamas has withstood the Israel's onslaught. And Israel always claims it is trying to kill Hamas people, but what it's really doing is killing civilians,
sure.
trying to drive them out. And this is weakening Israel because a growing number of there's largely, I think, like 80% of reserve force. It means reservists are called up to active duty. A growing number are refusing to serve, refusing to respond now. Uh, there's a growing issue with PTSD. Number of
I bet.
suicides has dramatically increased. And we got to remember, Israel is, in terms of population, it's smaller than New York City.
Yeah,
And so, can you imagine? Let's say that they've suffered um, 8,000 uh, casualties among the military so far. Can you imagine how the New York City Police Department would react if 8,000 of their members were killed or wounded?
right.
Oh my
Good
goodness,
point.
just a major story. So Israel's ability to sustain these operations, I think, is really in question, and yet they continue to overreach because they are in the hands of veritable fanatics, people like Bezalel Smotrich,
Yeah,
Ben Gavir, and this defense minister Katz, who has zero military experience, but is somehow in charge of the defense ministry. So it's I don't think this is going to end well for Israel. It doesn't. It has already become increasingly isolated internationally. We saw at the UN Security Council
mm,
the vote the other day. If it were not for the veto of the United States, there would have been the strong condemnation of Israel.
mhm.
And I think the United Nations is to the point of being ready to recognize Palestine as a state, as a nation.
And Trump has actually vocalized that he thinks that should happen as well. I think that's a tip of the cap to him.
Yeah.
But they've also paved this pathway almost directly to Iran, and now we're talking about potentially attacking Iran again. Whether that happens or not, we have no idea. But what's happening with that area as well?
Yeah. So I'm getting ready to start a project, I hope, with a professor in Iran. And what we're going to do is take every U.S. government report from my old office in counterterrorism. It's now the Bureau of Counterterrorism. Every year, as by order of Congress, they issue a report on the basically global terrorism. So I want to go through each year, starting in 2000, and record the number of terrorist attacks carried out by Iran. Now, I already know what the answer is. Um, very, very, very few, number one. Yet, Iran is consistently considered the top terrorist sponsor in the world.
Yeah,
Well, when they base it upon what supplies Hamas and Hezbollah. So I did a statistical collected the statistical evidence from the Israeli Foreign Ministry about 8 months ago, and the Israeli Foreign Ministry has recorded every attack by the Palestinians on Israelis or foreigners in Israel since August of 2000.
Hmm.
So I've got, 24 years worth of data. I was shocked to discover that total number of terrorist incidents during that time frame was fewer than 670. Not my numbers, the Israeli Foreign Ministry's numbers.
Since 2000?
Hmm.
It's very low. Yeah, we've heard
Yeah,
thousands, right? Like thousands.
no, data doesn't back that up. Um, and the same applies for Hezbollah. Then, um, when you looked at that, of that, like 665, I think was the number total attacks. Of those, only 105 were attributable to Hamas. And there were some bombings and things early in the 2000s, in the first decade, but
It was
tailed
much
off
more
after
violent
that.
back then. Much more
Yeah,
violent.
and so my point is, we've manufactured a narrative in the West about Hamas and Hezbollah being these awful terrorist groups. Yet, according to the State Department's reports, particularly since 2003, when they list the top 10 or the top 5 terrorist groups in the world, based upon their number of attacks and victims. Who are those? Those are not groups backed by Iran. Those are groups backed by Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
ISIS, Al Qaeda. In fact, look at us now. We've embraced a guy we used to call Al Jalani, Muhammad Al Jalani, who was a leader in ISIS, and then he set up Al Nusra, and then out of Al Nusra emerged Hayat Tahrir al Sham, HTS. This guy is now the president of Syria, and we're hugging the dude.
Yeah,
We sent our ambassador back to meet with him. He killed American soldiers.
lots of them. Yes.
Yeah. And so, man, we don't have a problem with that. No, no, we got to stop Hamas and Hezbollah, who, you know, they they get after Iran because of Iran's support for the Shia militia in Iraq during the U.S. occupation of Iraq. And yeah, maybe the Iranians supported the Iraqi Shia fighting American occupation, because that's exactly what it was. We like, oh,
Sure.
we were there for their freedom and democracy.
Nope.
Not nonsense. And we lie to ourselves about that. And when we do the same thing, we don't call it terrorism, but Iran does it, we call it terrorism.
That's
So
correct.
my only point in this is that, particularly over the last 7 years, when you look at all the major groups that are identified as carrying out terrorist attacks, they're all Sunni based. They're not Shia based. They have no tie whatsoever to Iran.
Hmm.
And so we're manufacturing this Iran is our great enemy, when what Iran's trying to do is get the Israelis to stop murdering the Palestinians.
Now, in recently, we have a whole new narrative coming out that Qatar is responsible for all the world's problems. Like, from my limited understanding of Qatar, it's basically a banking nation. I mean, it's a banking nation. They're kind of like Switzerland of the Middle East. How does Qatar fit into all of this, or is that purely narrative?
Well, Qatar's been, let's say that they're not a nation guided by deep principles.
Yeah, of
They're
course.
na-
They're a
they're
banking
na-
nation. Yeah.
yeah, they're
Find
guided
a
by
banker led by deep principles.
economic opportunity. So since the start of the our war on terrorism, Qatar became a major base, Al Udeid Air Force Base,
Hmm.
outside of Doha, massive base, houses both conventional and special operations forces, used as a transit point. It was. I went through there in 2006, headed to Iraq, but you had to fly through into Doha, a regular airport. Then got transferred out to Al Udeid, and then flew out of Al Udeid on U.S. military airlift. Um, Qatar's also been a site where Muslim Brotherhood's taken refuge,
Hmm.
and Hamas leaderships have hidden. And Qatar became a cutout. They took money from Assad and
Yes.
paid it to Hamas,
Yes.
in order to create Hamas as opposition to the Palestinian Authority in order to sabotage any peace deal. So Israel's been funding Hamas for years up until recently.
Years,
So
years
yeah,
and
no,
years.
that's yeah. So like I said, this anytime you hear Netanyahu trying to take this express moral outrage,
It's
you know,
laughable.
it's just he's as much part of the problem. Um, it's like listening to Heidi Fleiss complain about prostitution as an illegal activity.
It's a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is crazy. So where do we go from here? Russia Ukraine's not going to peel back. I think that's escalating at this point, but it only has a limited amount of time without funding. Europe's not going to be able to come up with money to save Ukraine in any sort of time frame. They have none. They're moving in a totally different direction. Uh, Qatar, whatever it's called anymore. That nation by itself has taken a lot of blame for being a banking nation. It does nothing different than the city of London does around the world. They just get the bad rap because they're in sand instead of grass.
Oh my
And
God, and it's like a moonscape.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't. I was shocked to learn that European tourists will flock there for a
really.
holiday. It's like, you kidding me? To go, it was. I was there during a sandstorm in particular. It was like not good, nasty.
Yeah, the whole Middle East is pretty rough. It's amazing that people have lived there that long, to be honest with you, without agriculture, like formal agriculture,
Yeah, yeah.
resilient people. But where does this go from here? Plus, there's the stuff happening with Syria. We're kind of going hands off on Syria now that they have basically ISIS Al Qaeda leadership. All the rebels in Syria, those were all former Al Qaeda and ISIS soldiers being labeled as liberators from Assad. Assad's still in Russia, I believe. He's still hiding in Russia,
Yeah, no, he's got sanctuary there.
as he
The
should.
biggest
Yeah,
the biggest issue right now is the status of the talks between uh, Washington and Tehran over Iran's alleged nuclear program or nuclear weapons program. Iran is not building and has not built a nuclear weapon. That is primarily because a religious decree passed down, a fatwa, more than 22 years ago,
hmm,
stipulating that building such a weapon would be seen as a violation of Islam. That's number one. Um, so Trump entered this negotiation. Saying, we got to stop Iran from building a nuke. And Iran said, okay, yeah, we can agree to that. Let's sign an agreement. We got to lift the sanctions off of us, but let's sign that agreement. Um, what many in the West don't understand is that Iran right now is in a much stronger position than it was 10 years ago when they were
absolutely.
signed the JCPOA, because at that time Russia and China were on board with the United States in imposing sanctions on Iran. And Iran was embroiled in a proxy war with Saudi Arabia in Yemen, and it was embroiled in the war in Syria against ISIS and the Sunni extremists. So it was diplomatically isolated. Now, 10 years later, that's not the case. It has signed a security agreement, comprehensive security agreement with um, um, with Russia. And as part of that agreement, Russia's pledged to help it build its peaceful nuclear energy up.
Hmm.
Russia will not engage any country in that's got a nuclear weapon. And Russia is in a position to guarantee that Iran does not have a nuke. Well, enter Trump's negotiation. This should be an easy deal because Iran says, fine, we won't build a nuke. We'll pledge it. We'll let you inspect all of our nuclear enrichment facilities so you can see that we're not creating nuclear material at a level that could be used to convert into a bomb. And we'll allow outside inspectors.
Hmm.
They can live there if they want. Okay, so that's the deal. Well, Trump comes back through Witkoff. No, you can't have any enrichment. And Iran says, okay, then no deal.
Yeah.
Because Iran was going to continue to enrich at least at 3.6% for peaceful nuclear energy because they're building nuclear power plants. They've got
Sure.
at least two or three in construction right now, and they're using them to desalinate water. Um, so the desalination of the water is critical for sort of south and southwestern Iran. But Trump, and then also we were trying to get them to give up that they can't have the missile force that they have, and Iran's simply not going to agree to that.
No,
So
they have a gigantic
balls in
military
Trump,
set. Yeah.
yeah, balls in Trump's court, and it looks like Trump is going to refuse to accept what the Iranians are willing to accept.
Why Iran? Out of all the nations there, the Iran has a nuclear weapon or is building a nuclear missile. That started in 1984. That was the first recorded headline in the New York Times. Would take that for what
Well,
it's
that
worth. That
yeah,
was from 1984.
yeah, that's been the boogeyman. And remember, we funded, we helped fund and equip Saddam Hussein
Yeah,
with chemical weapons that they were used to attack Iran, and uh, helped foment that war, which killed, I think, an estimated 2 million Iranians,
yeah.
a significant number. So the United States has always been, we've been. Uh, this is like, think of a couple you knew that got one of the ugliest divorces that ever took place, and each one is wishing the other was dead. That's
It's
the
a good analogy.
Russia-Iran relationship. They are they are separated, angry spouses.
And we just continue to drill home that narrative and drill home that narrative. And I hope listeners out there understand this narrative has been going on for 40 years. If they
Yeah.
haven't built a nuclear weapon in 40 years, they're not building a nuclear weapon.
Well, and we like to think that we try to portray Iran as, oh, they want to impose Sharia law. That's No, that's not Iran's thing. Um, and that Iran's been attacking us for no reason at all. Well, that's not true either. You
Right.
know, uh, we've always blamed Iran for the bombing of the so-called Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon in 1983, but it turns out that was a different group called Amal, not linked to Iran.
Hmm.
But one of the motivators for that attack was that the United States had been bombing, shelling with a naval artillery barrage from destroyers the Bekaa Valley, and killed a lot of Lebanese civilians. So guess what? You kill a bunch of locals, and the locals get pissed off at you. They come back and want revenge, and they'll kill you.
Sure. It's the way of
That's
war.
what
Yeah.
that's what happened.
Larry, we're about at the end of our hour. This is nuts. Where do we go from here? I mean, the ball's in Trump's court with Iran. I actually believe he'll do the right thing here, whether that turns out to be whatever the right thing is. I have faith that
Yeah.
he'll do something here.
I'm afraid he's going to go for the confrontation with Iran, and if he does that, it's going to be a military disaster for the United States, likely. It'll not be good for Iran either, but Iran will also be in a position that it was going to carry out retaliatory strikes on Israel, and
Right.
Israel will experience levels of devastation that it never has in its 75, 77-year history.
Well, let's pray that doesn't happen. And we'll keep
Sure,
praying
I'm
for that.
with you.
Yeah, we'll
I'm
keep
with you,
praying for
Eric.
this. The one thing about politics these days is they're unpredictable. In many areas, they're very predictable. When it comes to this stuff, we've heard peace talk get canceled, ceasefires get canceled. I think eventually that tide turns. I don't think the world wants war. I really do. I think the military industrial complex always does because that's how they thrive. But I
Right.
think that we're in a position now. I think we have a good leader in place. I love Donald Trump. I think he does the right thing as often as you can. I mean, not every president's going to fit the bill that you're looking for. It's very early in his administration, and we're dealing with quite a bit right now. There's a
Yeah.
lot. We have our own economic war. We have our own economic issues. We're still reporting false numbers on the economic front, which is fascinating. We should be correcting that pretty simply. But we have so many things here at home that these distractions overseas need to be settled peacefully. We need to get back to being America, a great version of America, rebuilding our own country, stay out of these foreign conflicts. These are not good for us. We are the big brother behind most of these allied nations. They cannot defend themselves. And I don't think any of these conflicts are legitimate. I don't think anything that we hear from the press, just talking to you for an hour, you get the good feel that everything you're hearing in the press here is nothing but warmongering and
Yeah.
propaganda to get us excited about killing people overseas we've never met. This is a ridiculous time in history. We should be looking at peace and prosperity
Yeah,
only.
it's lies. We got we got some real lessons we can learn from Russia. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, by 1995, only 7% of the Russian population were ranked in the middle class.
Hmm.
So 92% were basically impoverished.
Yeah.
Um, During that time frame, up until 1999, when Putin took over, the life expectancy fell from 63 to 56. Rates of suicide, alcoholism soared. Since 1999, Vladimir Putin, and it really started in about 2000 when he basically called in all the oligarchs and said, "You're going to stop stealing from the country. You're going to invest in the country." And you know, he didn't get them into any stupid foreign wars. Well, what's happened since then is the literacy rate in Russia is now like 99%.
Yeah. Skyrocketed.
The middle class numbers are about 51, 52%.
Wow.
Compare that to the United States. In the United States right now, our literacy rate is 79%.
It's horrible.
And of that, of the 50% of them read at the sixth grade level or
Yeah.
lower.
Yeah.
So, what Putin showed is if you don't waste all your money in foreign wars, if you take your money and your tax money and invest it in building great subways, great airports, great roads, great infrastructure, the people prosper,
Hmm.
and the people that are involved in building those things, and they get rich, and then they're able to have money to go out and buy things from other merchants. Russia shows, so it's not hopeless for us.
Yeah.
There's a way to turn it around, but to turn it around, we're going to go through some suffering, and we got to. It's just like, if you're going to go on a diet to lose weight, you got to stop taking in 4,000 calories a day.
Yes.
Okay, and stay away from the donuts.
Yeah. And you got to hit the gym, and that hurts too when you start.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and I think we're on that path. I think that we're in the same era. I think Trump is trying to do the same thing. Of course, he stepped into a hornet's nest. This administration that was brewed for 40 years. He is
yeah,
trying to calm it down. That's pretty obvious. Certain areas, of course, we're not going to agree with everything that anyone does in a position of power. That's why we talk about it. That's why we have these podcasts to get express those things out there. But I think he is focused on the middle class. I think that's a big thing for us. I think he's trying to get us out of foreign wars, which may actually involve being engaged in one. That is the way of war, and that's the way of reducing conflict. Sometimes you have to squish the bug. You can't just walk away from it. And I think that in the end, we're going to find ourselves in a good position. But like I agree with you. I think it's going to be a very painful year and a half until the stuff settles down until mid 26, 27. Until then, we're going to have some conflict resolution at a global scale that we've never dealt with before. There's just fires being lit everywhere. Taiwan is something we didn't even talk about. That's
yeah.
heating up again.
Well, but we're the ones heating that up.
Of course we are. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course we
this
are.
this is we need the first thing Trump should do is shutter at least 400 U.S. military bases overseas.
Yeah, I
Bring
agree.
those forces home. Cut the defense budget instead of expanding it to a trillion.
Yeah,
Cut it to, let's go 700 billion for starters. Uh, but
and be
you're not going to
efficient
do
with
that
it.
because to do that would be to decimate the economy right now because we're utterly dependent on war.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and yesterday he agreed with Elizabeth Warren to remove the debt ceiling. There's only one indication of what's coming with that is a huge print. And that's I called that the moment that he was reelected, which we all knew he was be reelected. We're going to print a lot of money in the next 4 years, and that's actually a good thing. And I'll explain that on another podcast. It's how you dilute away debt, but it's also going to cause pain. Again, like I think you gave the best analogy. We have to stop eating the donuts. We have to start hitting the gym, and that
Yeah,
involves all of us. Instead of sitting around complaining about what's happening in Washington D.C., we got to get our own lives together. Save our money, not spend it frivolously, be prepared for what's coming. And I think America is very prosperous in the next 5, call it 5, 10 years. I think we're back on top of things. but it's going to
Yep,
take every minute of that time frame for that to happen. Every minute.
fully agree.
Well, Larry, always a pleasure to have you on, my friend. This is
Uh,
always enlightening. I learned so much from you. Half of the time I leave here and I'm scared to death, but that's okay. That's okay. We all need the truth, whether we want to hear it or not. And all we can do is look at things from afar and make guesses. We don't know what'll happen tomorrow. Only God does.
no,
Um,
thanks for the opportunity.
absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate you being here, and thank you once again. Hey, Larry, how can everybody find you online? By the way,
Sonar21.com. SONAR21.com.
love it, love it. Well, thanks again, Larry. I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thank you, Eric.